I never thought I'd end up living with a guy like Connor. It started because my lease ended early. My landlord decided to sell the place, and I had 3 weeks to get out. I was broke, between jobs, and my options were slim. Couch surfing or finding a stranger off Craigslist. Connor was the stranger. His post was weirdly short. Room available. $700 per month. Must be clean. No drama. It had one photo of the room, bare except for a twin bed and a single lamp. I messaged him out of desperation, expecting nothing. He replied within an hour. 2 days later, I moved in. Connor didn't talk much. He was a mechanic, worked long hours, and kept to himself. Tattoos up both arms, always smelled like oil and metal. The kind of guy who gave off a quiet, brooding vibe, but not in a fake way. Just real. Our apartment was small. My room was right across from his. We shared a bathroom. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at once. But it was clean, quiet, and cheap. I was lucky to be there. We fell into a rhythm fast. I'd make coffee in the mornings, leave a cup for him on the counter. He'd fix stuff around the apartment without saying a word. The smoke detector, the leaky faucet, the wobbly table leg. I'd come home and it would just be done. We barely spoke, but there was something about him that felt solid, safe, even. Then one night, everything shifted. It was raining hard, loud enough that it woke me up. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I went to the kitchen for water. The apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of the street lamp bleeding through the window. I didn't expect Connor to be there. Shirtless, standing at the sink, pouring water into a glass. His back was to me, but even in the low light, I could see the scars on his shoulder. Not new. Old. Faint, but deep. Like something he'd never explain. He didn't jump when I came in. He just turned slightly and handed me the glass. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were in the small space. I leaned against the counter, the glass cold in my hand. "You good?" he asked. It wasn't a casual question. He looked at me like he actually wanted to know. I hesitated, then shrugged. "Just a lot on my mind." He nodded, slow and thoughtful, like he understood more than he let on. "Yeah," he said, "I get that." Then he surprised me. He leaned back against the counter next to me, arms crossed over his chest, and just stayed there. Not talking, not filling the silence. Just being there. And I didn't know why, but that meant more than any advice or sympathy ever could. Eventually, he glanced over at me, and for the first time since I moved in, he smiled. "You're all right," he said, and I swear, something cracked open in me in that moment. Because I believed him. That night stuck with me, not because anything dramatic happened. We didn't kiss, he didn't touch me, nothing like that, but because it felt like something opened up between us, something quiet but real. After that, Connor and I started talking more. Nothing deep at first, just regular stuff. He'd ask how my job hunt was going. I'd ask about his clients at the garage. He hated most of them, said they were impatient or acted like they knew more than he did. But when he talked about engines, his voice changed. Slower, more thoughtful, like he was talking about something that made sense to him in a world where not much else did. The more we talked, the more I realized Connor wasn't just some tattooed tough guy who kept to himself. He was sharp, observant, kind in this low-key, almost invisible way. He wasn't the kind of person who'd check in on you directly, but he'd notice you were out of coffee and replace it before you could, or leave the better half of a sandwich in the fridge with a sticky note that just said, "Eat it." He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just gave a shit, quietly. One night, a couple weeks after the rainstorm, I got home late after a terrible job interview. The guy interviewing me spent half the time texting under the table and the other half asking if I was comfortable with long, unpaid hours. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just dropped my bag, collapsed on the couch, and covered my face with my hands. Connor walked in a few minutes later, tossed his keys on the counter, and paused when he saw me. He didn't say anything, just walked to the kitchen, came back with 2 beers, and handed me one. "Bad day?" he asked, settling on the armchair across from me. I nodded. Interview was a joke. The guy didn't even know my name. Connor cracked open his beer. "You want me to beat him up?" I laughed. Hard. It caught me off guard, but I needed it. "That'd probably get me blacklisted," I said, wiping my face. "Worth it," he said, with this little half-smile that I was starting to recognize as his version of a big grin. Then he leaned back and looked at me differently, not like a roommate, not like a guy who barely talked, just someone who saw me, someone who wasn't afraid of what he saw. "You're gonna land something better," he said. "Just gotta keep showing up." It wasn't anything revolutionary, but coming from him, it mattered. There was a stillness in the room for a second. He took a sip of his beer and tilted his head at me. "Why'd you really leave your last place?" he asked. I'd never told him the whole story, just that my lease ended early. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I looked down at the bottle in my hand. "My ex," I said finally. It was messy. He didn't want me to leave, but I couldn't keep living there. It felt like I couldn't breathe. Connor nodded like he understood. He didn't push, didn't ask for details, just let the silence sit for a while. Then he said, "That why you flinch when your phone rings?" I looked up, surprised. "I've noticed," he added. Not judging, just noticed. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever paid that much attention. Not even my ex, ironically. "Yeah," I said after a beat. "It's dumb." I blocked him, but sometimes I still expect it to be him. "Not dumb," Connor said. "Takes a while to rewire your brain after someone screws with it." I stared at him. "You talk like you've been through it." He didn't respond right away, just swirled the beer in his bottle, eyes somewhere distant. "Yeah," he said finally. "Different kind of situation, but yeah." We didn't talk much after that, just sat in the quiet, but when I got up to go to bed, he said something as I passed him. "You're safe here, just so you know." I stopped. And for a second, I wanted to turn around and say something, anything, to acknowledge what that meant. But I couldn't find the words. So I just nodded and kept walking. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because something in my chest felt different. Like the weight I'd been carrying for months was finally starting to lift. Connor made me feel grounded. Like no matter what chaos was happening in my life, there was this one person who wouldn't let me fall. And maybe, just maybe, that was starting to mean more than I was ready to admit. A few nights later, I caught Connor in the garage. We had this tiny garage off the alley behind our building, just big enough to fit a car if you parked at the perfect angle. But Connor didn't use it for that. He used it like a personal workshop. Tools lined the walls. There was a metal workbench on one side, a dusty speaker hanging from a nail, and half-finished motorcycle parts scattered everywhere. I'd never really gone back there before. It felt like his space, you know? Like stepping into someone's room uninvited. But I couldn't sleep. Again, so I wandered down with a hoodie over my head and an energy drink in hand, and found the side door slightly ajar. Light spilled out into the cool night air. Inside, Connor had his sleeves rolled up, grease on his arms, a smudge of black across his cheek. He didn't hear me at first. He had earbuds in, music playing low enough I could just make out the bass line. He was focused, like deeply focused. I leaned in the doorway, watching him for a moment before clearing my throat. He looked up, startled, then pulled one earbud out. "Hey." "Couldn't sleep," I said. He gestured with a wrench. "Join the club." I stepped in, closing the door behind me. The air smelled like oil and rubber and something faintly metallic. It wasn't unpleasant, just distinct. I perched on a stool near the bench while he wiped his hands with a rag. "What are you working on?" I asked. He nodded toward a vintage-looking frame on the stand. "Rebuilding this 72 CB500 for a buddy. He wrecked it trying to show off last summer. Bent the forks, cracked the tank. It's a mess." I nodded like I knew what that meant. Sounds painful, he smirked. Yeah, for the bike and his ego. I watched him for a moment, then said, You seem different out here. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. Different how? More relaxed, like this is your real element. He shrugged, wiping grease from his fingers. Probably is. It's quiet, no one trying to be anything. Just parts that either work or don't. That sounds nice, I said, meaning it. He didn't reply right away, just tossed the rag onto the bench and leaned against the wall. Why couldn't you sleep? I hesitated. I keep thinking about what you said the other night, about feeling safe here. He watched me closely, his arms crossed. Yeah? I'm not used to that, I said. Not just feeling safe, but seen. He looked down, then back up. Me neither. There was a pause, not awkward, but charged, like something invisible between us had shifted again. Not dramatically, just a small tilt. A slow lean towards something neither of us had named yet. You want a drink? He asked suddenly, breaking the tension. I blinked. Sure. He walked over to a mini fridge, tucked behind a stack of tires, and pulled out 2 beers. He handed me one and cracked his open, nodding toward the back step, just outside the door. We sat there, side by side, legs stretched out into the night. I asked him how he got into bikes. He told me about his uncle, who owned a shop and let him take things apart as a kid. Said it was the first place he felt like he could actually do something right. Then he asked me what I used to dream about before life got complicated. I had to think about it. Photography, I said eventually. I wanted to travel and shoot for magazines. But that felt like, I don't know, too much to ask. Connor took a slow sip of his beer. Doesn't mean it's not still in you. That hit me harder than I expected. We sat in silence again after that, watching the moon rise over the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. Then, softly, Connor said, You don't have to pretend with me, you know. I turned to look at him. His eyes were on the horizon, but his voice was steady. I know you've got your own stuff, and I'm not pushing. I get it, more than you think. I didn't know what to say to that, so I did something else. I leaned my head on his shoulder. He froze for a second. Not tense, just surprised. Then he let out a slow breath and leaned into me, just barely. We sat like that for a long time, and I think in that moment everything in me finally exhaled. Because for once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. For once, I just existed. And that was enough. After that night, something shifted between us. It wasn't like we suddenly became a couple or started holding hands around the apartment. It was more subtle than that. We moved differently around each other. More in sync, more aware. Like the air between us carried something neither of us had the words for yet. I'd wake up in the morning and find a fresh coffee already poured in my mug. Black, the way I liked it. He started cooking dinner more often, even when he didn't say anything about it. I'd come home to the smell of garlic or onions or something vaguely spicy, and he'd just nod toward the stove like, it's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. We'd sit on the couch, eating off mismatched plates, watching reruns of shows neither of us really cared about, the space between us smaller every night. Our legs would brush, and neither of us would move. He started passing me the remote differently too, hand to hand, his fingers holding on just a second too long. And still, we didn't talk about it. Not directly. I think we were both afraid to break whatever fragile thing had started growing between us. Then one Friday night, I got a text from an old friend inviting me to a small get-together. Nothing crazy. Just drinks, music, maybe a little dancing. I wasn't planning on going. My social battery had been fried lately. But I mentioned it offhandedly to Connor while we were both sitting in the kitchen, eating takeout straight from the containers. You should go, he said without looking up. You think? He nodded, jabbing a piece of chicken with his fork. You've been cooped up too long. I studied his face, trying to read the tone behind the words, but he didn't give much away. You could come with, I said, not even meaning to, really. He paused. To a party? It's chill. Not a rave or anything. He looked at me like I'd just suggested we join a cult. Nah, he said. Not really my thing. I tried to shrug it off, but something about the way he said it hit wrong. A couple hours later, I left anyway. The party was fine. Loud enough to drown out thoughts, but not loud enough to stop me from noticing the way my eyes kept drifting to the door, like I half expected Connor to show up anyway. He didn't. I didn't stay long. By the time I got back to the apartment, it was just past midnight. The living room lights were off, but a faint glow spilled out from under the garage door. I hesitated, then walked back there. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, a beer in hand, another already open beside him. He didn't look up when I stepped in. "You good?" I asked. He took a sip before replying. "Didn't feel like sleeping." I nodded, then walked over and sat beside him, not saying anything for a while. "You mad I didn't go?" he asked eventually. "No," I said. "But I wish you had." He turned to look at me. "Why?" "I don't know," I said. "It would have been easier, I think." "Easier than what?" I stared at the floor. "Easier than pretending I didn't want you there." His expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten slightly around the bottle. "You said you weren't used to being seen," he said. "Same here." I looked at him. Really looked. His jaw was tight. His eyes, usually so steady, were a little unsteady now, like he wasn't sure if he was about to mess everything up. So I took the chance from him. I leaned in, slow, not rushed, just enough that he could stop me if he wanted to. He didn't. Our lips touched, soft at first, tentative. Then his hand found the side of my face, rough fingertips against my skin, and he pulled me in harder. It wasn't urgent or wild. It was careful, like he'd thought about this 100 times, but never let himself believe it could actually happen. When we finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "This gonna mess things up?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "I don't think so." He smiled then, not the crooked half smile I was used to, a real one. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since I'd seen him let his guard down like that. Maybe never. We stayed out there for a while, didn't say much, just existed in that quiet little space between fear and hope. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a movie moment, but it was real. And somehow, that meant more than anything. The morning after that kiss, everything felt still. Not awkward, not tense, just different. I woke up to the smell of eggs and something faintly sweet. Maybe cinnamon. I padded out into the kitchen, still groggy, and found Connor at the stove. Shirtless, in those worn flannel pajama pants he always wore when he didn't expect company. His hair was sticking up in about 5 different directions. He didn't turn around when he heard me come in, but he did speak. "Hope you're hungry." I leaned against the counter. "Is this your version of a post-kiss breakfast?" He chuckled. "Something like that." There was a beat of silence. Then he turned to look at me, just a quick glance, like he was checking to make sure I was still here. "Still okay." "You slept all right?" he asked. "Better than usual," I said. "You?" He shrugged. "I mean, after a first kiss with my roommate? Hard not to." That made me smile. He plated the food. Scrambled eggs, toast, and 2 slices of something that looked suspiciously like French toast. I didn't ask where the sudden domestic energy came from. I just took the plate and followed him to the living room, where we sat on the couch like we had 100 times before. Only this time our legs touched, and neither of us moved away. It felt normal. Not in a boring way, just in a settled way. Like my body already knew this was where it was supposed to be. We didn't talk about what we were. Not yet. Instead, we talked about nothing. About how the neighbor's dog kept digging holes in the shared yard. About how his boss was a nightmare. About how I was still getting ghosted by recruiters. He offered to help me redo my resume, which, coming from a mechanic, made me laugh harder than I should have. But by the time we finished eating, the air had shifted again. Connor turned to me, serious now. "Hey, about last night," I waited. "I don't want this to be casual," he said. "If we're doing this, whatever this is, I'm in, all the way." I nodded slowly. "Me too." There was relief in his eyes. Not dramatic, but real. "I've never done this before," he added. "Been with a guy." I figured. He looked at me, like he was afraid I'd ask him to justify that. I didn't. "You don't have to prove anything," I said. "We go at your pace." That must have meant more to him than I realized, because the next thing I knew, he was leaning over, kissing me again. Not quick this time. Slow. Intentional. And something inside me melted. That week, everything changed, but not in a way that made the world feel off balance. If anything, it felt more aligned than it had in a long time. Connor started finding excuses to brush against me. His hand on my lower back when we crossed paths in the kitchen, or a shoulder bump when we sat down on the couch. We weren't rushing anything, but the closeness was constant, comforting. At night, he'd sometimes tap on my door. Never pushy. Just there. The third time it happened, I pulled the door open and didn't say anything. Just stepped aside. He came in, quiet, and sat on the edge of my bed. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then shook his head. "I think so. I just wanted to be near you." That wasn't something Connor said easily. Vulnerability wasn't in his usual vocabulary. So I didn't press. I just slid into bed beside him. We didn't do anything but lie there, fully clothed, his arm resting across my waist, my head against his shoulder. It was the most intimacy I'd felt in years, and yet the fear crept in. Not from him, but from me. The more I felt myself leaning into this, the more I wondered what would happen if it fell apart, if Connor realized it was all a phase. If I got too comfortable and he backed away, if I ended up hurt again, because the truth was, I wasn't sure I had it in me to start over after this. One night, I guess he picked up on it. We were watching TV, something forgettable, and I was half zoned out when he nudged my leg with his foot. "You're spiraling," he said. I blinked. "What?" "You get this look on your face when your brain won't shut up, kind of like a puppy trying to do algebra?" I rolled my eyes. "Thanks for that." He muted the TV. "Talk to me." I hesitated. "What if you change your mind?" I asked finally. "What if this gets too real and you, I don't know, bail?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I spent most of my life running from things, from feelings, from people. But you," he paused, exhaling, "you make me want to stay." My heart cracked open a little more. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and I believed him. Not because he said the right words, but because he looked me dead in the eye when he said them. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath around someone. I could just be. And maybe that was love. By mid-October, it was clear that whatever Connor and I had wasn't temporary. The air was starting to change, cooler in the mornings, crisp enough that our breath hung like smoke when we stepped outside. And in some weird way, the seasons shifting made everything between us feel even more real, tangible. Like the universe was syncing up with us, we still hadn't put a label on it. Neither of us said boyfriend or dating out loud. But at night, when he climbed into my bed and curled around me like it was the most natural thing in the world, I didn't need words to know what it was. One night, we stayed up late just talking. No distractions, no TV, just the hum of the fridge and the city outside the window. Connor was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. I was tucked under his arm, tracing the edge of one of his tattoos with my fingers. "You ever think about the future?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "Like how far?" "I don't know. A year? 5? 10? He hummed. "Used to be, I didn't think past the next day. But now," he looked down at me. "Now I do," I smiled. "What do you see?" He shrugged, but there was something soft in his expression. "Not the bar job. Not the apartment, maybe. But you." The words hit me hard. In the best way. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was scared I'd say too much too fast. So instead, I leaned in and kissed him. It said everything I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, we slipped into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. We'd go grocery shopping together. He'd cook more often, sometimes experimenting with recipes he found online, and usually making a mess of the kitchen in the process. I'd clean up after, pretending to be annoyed, but secretly loving every second of it. I started picking up freelance work again. Small gigs, photo editing, a couple of shoots around town. Connor offered to drive me to a wedding job one weekend, and I almost laughed at the thought of him in that setting. But he just said, "I'll hang in the truck. Bring me some cake." It wasn't perfect. We still had our differences. He was private, quiet, sometimes hard to read. I was more open, emotional, and occasionally neurotic. We had a couple of tense moments, mostly about small things, like laundry or how I'd leave lights on, but nothing that shook the foundation. If anything, those tiny fights made it more real. We weren't playing pretend, we were living in it. Then came the day I met his mom. It wasn't planned. We were grabbing lunch after he finished a Saturday shift, and she just happened to be in the same diner. Small town coincidence. Connor spotted her first. His body went still. I looked up and saw a woman in her 50s, with the same sharp jaw and heavy brow. She smiled when she saw him, then paused when she noticed me. "This is my roommate," Connor said when she walked over. I tried not to let the words sting. I wasn't offended. Not really. But still, it was like being tugged back 2 steps after walking 10. She nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." "Matt," I said, shaking her hand. She sat for a minute, made small talk with Connor. How work was, if he needed anything, if the car was still giving him trouble. She didn't ask about me again. And when she left, she hugged him and barely acknowledged me on the way out. We sat there for a while after. He stared at the half-empty coffee mug in front of him. "She doesn't know," I said gently. He shook his head. "No? Do you want her to?" He didn't answer, just sighed and looked out the window. "It's not about being ashamed," he said eventually. "It's just complicated. She's old school, always has been. I don't know how she'd react." I nodded. "You don't have to explain." He looked at me finally. "But I want to. Eventually." That was enough for me. Later that night, he pulled me close in bed, his mouth brushing against my shoulder. "You're not a secret," he said softly. "I just don't know how to say it yet." I turned to face him, kissed him slow. "I'm not going anywhere." He held on to me like he believed it. Like, maybe, for the first time, someone wasn't going to leave. The holidays came faster than I expected. The weather dropped. Our windows fogged in the mornings, and Connor started wearing that old denim jacket I secretly loved. I bought one of those tiny fake trees from a dollar store and set it up on the counter with a single strand of lights. He made fun of it, called it the saddest Christmas tree in the Western Hemisphere, but he plugged it in every night without fail. We didn't talk about gifts. We weren't there officially, and I wasn't sure if we were supposed to make that kind of gesture. But 2 days before Christmas, I found a new camera strap on my pillow. Leather, worn in, beautiful. There was no note, just a small smile from Connor when I walked into the kitchen holding it. "Figured your old one was falling apart," he said. I set it on the table and walked up to him, kissing him soft. "Thank you," he grinned. "I like the one you got me too," I blinked. "I didn't." He held up a pair of gloves. Black leather, warm, practical. "I found the receipt in your backpack," he added, smirking. I groaned. "You weren't supposed to see that yet." He just pulled me in by the belt loops and said, "Too late." It was one of those weeks where everything felt suspended in warmth. Even though the city was gray and the streets were slushy, the apartment was a kind of sanctuary. We cooked together more, fell asleep on the couch more, laughed at nothing more. But it wasn't all peace and quiet. New Year's Eve stirred something in both of us. It started with a party. A mutual friend of mine was throwing a get-together. Small crowd, mostly queer folks, safe space. Connor hesitated when I asked if he wanted to come. "I'm not really the party type," he said. "I know. But it's not that kind of party. It's chill. We can leave anytime." He studied me for a second, then nodded. All right, I'll try. I didn't realize how nervous he was until we got there. He kept close to me, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning every room we passed. The host gave him a warm welcome, but Connor's smile was tight, polite, not real. I squeezed his hand when we made it to the kitchen. You okay? He nodded. Yeah, just lotta people. I introduced him to a few friends. Everyone was nice, respectful, but I could tell Connor was on edge the whole time. Not rude, not distant, just not comfortable. We only stayed an hour before he tugged me aside and said, "Can we go?" Of course, I said yes. Back at the apartment, we shut our jackets and fell into the couch like the whole night had weighed 10 pounds. Sorry, he muttered. I thought I could do it. You did do it, I said. You showed up, that's enough. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not that I didn't want to be there. I felt like I didn't belong. Everyone seemed so at ease. You belong with me, I said. That's the only thing that matters. His face shifted. Something cracked in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or trust. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine. Thank you. For the rest of the night, we stayed in. Drank cheap champagne from mismatched mugs, watched the countdown on TV. At midnight, I kissed him slow, steady, no rush. He looked at me afterward, like he'd just made some kind of decision in his head. What? I asked. I want to tell her, he said. It took me a second to catch up. Your mom? He nodded. Soon. I don't want to keep you a secret. My chest tightened. You sure? He hesitated, then nodded. You make me sure. It was quiet after that. I didn't press him. He'd do it in his own time. And honestly, just knowing he wanted to was enough. We went to bed around 1:30. I fell asleep first, I think. I remember him brushing his fingers through my hair as I drifted off. And when I woke up, he was still there, still holding me, still here. It was a Sunday morning when he finally did it. Mid-January. One of those crisp, dry days where the sun shines but the cold still slices through your jacket. We were making coffee in the kitchen, like usual. Me in sweatpants and socks, Connor shirtless and half awake. He was scrolling through his phone when he suddenly said, I told her. I looked up, blinking. What? My mom? I told her. Last night? I paused, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. What did you say? I just said it. No build-up. I called her and said, There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I'm seeing someone. His name's Matt. I lowered the mug slowly, heart racing. And? He scratched the back of his neck. She was quiet for a while, asked if I was sure, then said she didn't know what to say, but that she loved me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That's really good, right? He nodded, eyes still on the countertop. Yeah. It is. Then he looked at me. She asked about you. That stopped me. She did? He nodded again. Said she wants to meet you, not today or tomorrow, but soon. My stomach twisted in the best way, a mix of nerves and something else, something warmer. She knows I'm not great at this stuff, he added. But she also said she's proud of me. I crossed the kitchen, wrapped my arms around him from behind. He leaned into it. You should be proud of you too, I said against his back. We stood there for a while, just breathing together. The smell of coffee filling the air, the warmth of the sun hitting the counter. Everything ordinary but somehow perfect. That was the thing about being with Connor. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic milestones. Just a steady unfolding of realness, of presence, of choosing each other again and again in 100 small ways that made the big stuff feel easy. Months passed. I landed more steady freelance work, eventually picked up a part-time gig teaching a photography class at the community center. Connor cut back his hours at the garage to focus on restoring vintage bikes, something he started doing more seriously once he realized people would actually pay for it. We took our first trip together in April, just a weekend away, rented a cabin up in the mountains, unplugged from everything. We hiked, cooked, got lost on some back road, and didn't even care. It was the first time I'd ever seen him truly relax. At night, wrapped up in a blanket, he told me he loved me. He said it in the quietest voice, not like a performance, not to get anything in return, just a truth. And I told him I loved him too. Because I did. I still do. We never moved to a new place. People ask why, and I never know how to explain that the apartment, the dingy little second-floor walk-up with the squeaky pipes and flickering hallway light, became ours. Not because of the space, but because of what happened inside it. Because of who we became inside it. It's not always easy. There are days we fight, days we retreat into silence. But we've learned how to come back from those moments. How to sit at the kitchen table, long after dinner's gone cold, just talking it out. No one storms off. No one slams doors. We stay. That's the difference. That's the love.